As you just heard from the EPA regarding their radiation survey, they found contamination with radioactive materials such as strontium-90, cesium-137, plutonium-239, and tritium. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the health effects of radiation exposure from these materials. If your body is exposed to the ionizing radiation that they give off, several types of damage can occur. At very high doses, prompt death within a few days can result from acute radiation syndrome. This was seen in the immediate aftermath of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. We're not talking about these types of doses today. When officials say there is no immediate threat to health from the lower exposures, they merely mean that doses aren't so extremely high so as to cause prompt death. What we are concerned about here is the latent or delayed health effects from lower doses that can cause health problems for many years after exposure. For example, if radiation damages genetic materials in our reproductive cells, genetic defects can occur in generations to come. If radiation damages genetic materials in other cells, it can cause cancers in solid organs such as the lung, thyroid, breast, stomach, etc. Or in our blood elements such as lymph systems, leukemias, and lymphomas can develop. These cancers may take years or even decades after their exposure to develop. This is called the latency period. In addition, ionizing radiation can contribute to risks of heart disease and other non-cancer ailments. I'm just going to say, many of the studies on the effects of health and radiation comes from the National Academy of Sciences. And I want to point out, the National Academy of Sciences are the scientists. These are the blue ribbon scientists of our nation. In terms of the risk of cancer causing, the National Academy of Sciences and all federal radiation protection agencies accept the principle that there is no safe level. In other words, all radiation, no matter how small, increases your risk of cancer to some degree. This is called the linear no threshold principle, which concludes that there is no threshold or dose below which harm cannot occur. And that risk increases generally as a linear fashion, dependent upon the radiation dose. The more we learn scientifically, the more dangerous radiation appears. Some subgroups of the population are more susceptible to radiation-induced cancer than others. A child is more vulnerable than a young adult, an infant more risk than the child, and a fetus more readily harmed than all other groups. Women are more susceptible than men. Some will tell you that we are exposed all the time to background radiation, from natural radioactivity in soil and certain foods, from cosmic rays, with the implication that it is therefore harmless. Quite the contrary. The National Academy of Sciences estimates that about 3% of our population will get cancer from natural background exposure. With our current population of about 300 million, that means approximately 10 million of us will develop cancer from background radiation exposure alone. The issue, therefore, is trying to avoid adding to that inescapable death toll by assuring to the maximum extent possible that people are not exposed to additional radiation, unnecessary, avoidable exposures. For example, by contamination of soil, water, or air. There are two primary types of ionizing radiation: penetrating and non-penetrating. Both are dangerous. Gamma rays, as we were seeing, and neutron radiation are penetrating. They can cause cancer in you even if radiation source is outside or external. If you stand on contaminated soil, these kinds of radiation can cause cancer even if you get none of the material inside yourself. Beta and alpha radiation are largely non-penetrating. But if you breathe in the air or drink fluids or eat foods contaminated with these radionuclides, they give off beta or alpha radiation. They can irradiate organs for a very long time with significant internal doses, producing elevated risk of cancer. Thus, avoiding standing on contaminated pieces of soil is not enough. One has to make sure the contamination does not migrate to the air or the food that we ingest. Another key concept is that of half-life. That is the amount of time it takes for one half of a radionuclide to decay to something else. But there's still half of it there at that point. And after another half-life, there's still a quarter of it there, and so on. Generally, it is assumed that it takes 10 to 20 half-lives before radioactive material decays to an essentially non-radioactive status. With these basic concepts described, let's talk briefly about the specific key radionuclides found by the EPI to be still contaminating the site. They found some plutonium-239. This is felt to be probably one of the most toxic substances and materials on the planet. It is an alpha emitter, and inhaling a few millionths of an ounce will cause lung cancer with virtually 100% guarantee. It has a 24,000-year half-life, so it is dangerous for about 500,000 years. They found numerous locations contaminated with strontium-90. To our bodies, strontium-90 looks like calcium, so it is taken up in our teeth and our bones. In fact, PSR received the Nobel Peace Prize in the early 80s for establishing that human baby teeth were contaminated with strontium-90 from atmospheric nuclear testing. This went on to result in the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which put nuclear testing underground. When it gets in bone, it can emit those rays and cause leukemia and other blood cancers for years to come. It has a half-life of about 30 years, so it's dangerous for about 600 years. The EPA found the highest number of soil samples to be contaminated with cesium-137. It's a powerful gamma emitter, as we saw with all the various detecting devices. Dangerous whether it is outside of you or if it is incorporated into the body by inhalation or ingestion. It can cause cancer in any organ. It also has a half-life of about 30 years, dangerous for centuries to come. It's interesting with many of these radionuclides, many of them the body perceives as life-giving elements. And again, cesium again talks about whether it can be an external or internal, causing cancer in every single organ, because cesium to the body looks like potassium, which is contained in every single cell of our body. As you'll hear, the EPA found also a plume of tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, which also incorporates itself into the water molecule present throughout our body. It is present in groundwater at levels above EPA's safe water drinking limits. It has a half-life of about 12 years, so levels were likely even higher in the past. Tritium can incorporate itself anywhere in the body there's water. There's water everywhere. As you'll hear, the site at both the nuclear and rocket testing areas is also significantly contaminated with a range of chemical hazardous substances such as TCE and other volatile organic compounds, heavy metals such as mercury and lead, dioxins, perchlorate, PCBs, and so on. I understand the DTSC and NASA will speak upon the risks therein of these elements. The federal government has paid for several studies associated with exposures from the Santa Susana field. One was by a team from UCLA School of Public Health. They found significant increases in death rates from cancer of the lung, lymph, and blood systems, as well as other organs among workers who were more exposed compared to similar workers at the site with lower exposures. The most exposed workers were 3 times as likely to die of cancer as the least exposed workers. The second study was performed off-site populations by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. That study found that, quote, the incidence rate was more than 60% greater among residents living within 2 miles of the field than among residents living more than 5 miles from the field for the following types of cancer: thyroid, upper aerodigestive, which includes the oral and nasal cavities, esophagus, pharynx, and larynx, bladder and blood and lymph tissues, including leukemias, lymphomas, and multiple myelomas. Materials about these studies are posted on the workgroup website. If the community wishes to hear more, I understand the workgroup may invite researchers to present their findings at a subsequent meeting. The oversight panel for the UCLA study of the Santa Susana field workers was chaired by Dr. David Michaels, who subsequently became the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Health, Environment, and Safety. He brought the attention of the White House to the White House of the Santa Susana field study with a number of studies of Department of Energy other nuclear facilities which found similar increased cancer risks. This resulted in legislation to compensate ill workers and their families, including those from Santa Susana, which you'll hear about more from the next speaker. Thank you.